There was probably a moment you started to notice, not a big realization, just a quiet one. Maybe it was the Sunday you spent entirely alone. No plans, no texts, no guilt about it, and realized somewhere around 4 p.m. that you hadn't thought about anyone else once. Maybe it was the party you left at 10 p.m. while everyone else was just getting started, and the drive home felt like the first real breath you'd taken all evening. Maybe it was the moment a friend asked why you hadn't been around much lately and you struggled to explain something that felt completely obvious from the inside. At some point, a thought showed up. I think I actually prefer being alone. Not as a complaint, not as something to fix. Just as a fact, you were finally letting yourself name. You were right to name it. And psychology explains exactly what's behind it. For a long time, preferring solitude got collapsed into one category: introversion, shyness, social anxiety. Researchers now know these aren't the same thing and that confusing them has cost people a useful way of understanding themselves. Dr. Esther Buchholz, a clinical psychologist who spent decades studying what she called alone time, found that solitude isn't the absence of connection. It's a specific psychological state, one that certain nervous systems actively require to process, integrate, and function at full capacity. She called the tendency to seek and use that state restorative solitude preference. And people who have it aren't broken. They're wired differently. Here's what that wiring actually looks like. Sign 1. You've stopped reaching out first and you're not sure how to explain why. From the outside, it looks like indifference, like you stopped caring about the people who used to be in your life. But psychology research on social selectivity tells a different story. Dr. William Chopik at Michigan State University found that people with higher levels of reflective processing become increasingly selective about where they direct their social energy over time. Not because connection matters less, because the wrong kind of connection has started to cost more than it returns. This shift tends to happen somewhere between 26 and 31. The group chat you muted, the birthday you forgot to acknowledge, the invitation you declined without explaining. None of it felt like loss. That was the part that surprised you. Psychologists call this deliberate social calibration, the process of aligning your social output with what your nervous system can actually sustain. The person who stopped reaching out first isn't pulling away. They're finally being honest about what they actually have energy for. Sign 2. You leave events earlier than almost anyone, and something lifts on the drive home. From the outside, it looks like you don't like people, or that you weren't having fun, or that you're being difficult about something everyone else handles fine. But here's what's actually happening in your nervous system during those events. Dr. Elaine Aron at Stony Brook University has spent over 2 decades studying high sensory processing sensitivity, a trait found in roughly 15 to 20% of the population. People with this trait don't just perceive more. Their nervous systems process incoming information more deeply, more completely across more channels simultaneously. A crowded room isn't just a room. It's dozens of simultaneous social signals all being processed at once. Expressions, tones, dynamics, subtext. By hour 2 of most social situations, that processing load becomes unsustainable. Leaving early isn't avoidance. It's your nervous system telling you it's done working at that intensity. By your late 20s, you stopped fighting that signal. Not because you're antisocial, because you finally stopped mistaking your biology for a personality flaw. Sign 3. When you're alone, you don't feel lonely. You feel like yourself. This is the one most people who prefer solitude struggle to explain because it sounds like it should be the other way around. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. Solitude is the satisfaction of chosen aloneness. They use the same setting. They produce entirely opposite experiences. Research published in the Journal of Personality found that people with what psychologists call high solitude capacity, the ability to be alone without feeling lonely, don't just tolerate aloneness. They show measurably higher levels of well-being during unstructured alone time compared to equal-length social time. Not because they don't want connection, but because a specific kind of self-access only opens when no one else is in the room. The version of you that thinks clearly, the version that knows what it actually wants, the version that isn't managing anyone else's energy while managing its own. That version doesn't need an audience. It needs space. But here's what this also means. And it's the part most videos like this one won't tell you. Preferring solitude doesn't come free. It means there will be people who interpret your absence as rejection. Friendships that fade not because you wanted them to, but because maintaining them required a kind of energy you couldn't consistently produce. There will be moments at 27, 28, 29 when everyone around you seems to be building their social life louder. More events, more group chats, more presence, and you'll quietly wonder if the direction you've been moving in is wrong. It isn't. But that doubt is real, and pretending it isn't doesn't help you carry it. The question isn't whether there's a cost. The question is whether you're paying it consciously or just feeling it without understanding where it comes from. Sign 4. Your alone time isn't rest. It's when you actually become functional again. Most people treat recovery from social situations as passive. You come home, you decompress, you watch something. For people with restorative solitude preference, something more active is happening. A study from the University of Illinois found that introverted individuals with high sensory processing showed significantly greater cortisol recovery during unstructured alone time compared to structured social time. Even social time they described as enjoyable. In other words, your nervous system isn't just unwinding after hard interactions. It's completing a process that can only run when external input stops. Psychologists call what happens during that time restorative processing, the nervous system's offline integration cycle. You've noticed it. The clarity that arrives at 11 p.m. The problem that untangles itself in the shower. The feeling after a full day alone of being ready again in a way you weren't that morning. That's not you being antisocial. That's your nervous system doing exactly what it needs to do in the only conditions where it can. Somewhere between 25 and 32, this pattern becomes hard to ignore. The social expectations of your early 20s, the events, the group chats, the visible presence, start to feel like a version of yourself you were performing. And at some point, without making an announcement, you started to stop. Not because you became someone different, because you started to become someone more specific. Most people spend their late 20s trying to add more. More connection, more presence, more people. Some people spend that same time quietly removing things that never fit right in the first place. There's a difference between isolation and selection. Most people who look isolated from the outside are actually just very specific about what they let in. What Dr. Buchholz called restorative solitude preference isn't a trait that developed because something went wrong. It's a wiring pattern, and it means that certain things, the kind of thinking, the kind of clarity, the kind of self-access that other people spend years chasing those things are already available to you. In silence. Alone. Which is exactly where you've always been most yourself. That's not something to fix. That's something to understand. Which of these signs felt most familiar to you? Leave a comment. I read every one. And if this gave language to something you've been carrying quietly for a while, send it to someone who might need to hear it too.